Joanna Scotcher, set and costume designer of Roy Williams' Antigone, in conversation with Sam Girdham, artistic director of Purple Theatre Company. They are in a black studio with white tape on the floor marked in a grid, with black curtains as a backdrop. Joanna is a white woman in her mid-30s. She has a dark complexion with long black hair and a blunt short fringe. She can be seen in a patterned black shirt, dark trousers and scruffy black Converse trainers. Sam is a mixed heritage person in their late 40s. They've got long black hair which is piled on the top of their head in a messy bun and olive skin, and they identify as gender fluid.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm really interested to talk to you about Antigone and Roy Williams' adaptation of the original Sophocles play. When you first received the text, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, I was really excited because the themes of the original play are fantastic, and kind of these epic themes which I was sort of interested in exploring in my own work. But also what Roy does is, in his kind of recontextualizing them into slightly modern scenarios, I think he makes them a lot more accessible and relevant to a different audience. So what I was excited about was that potentially like the setting and the language of his version would be accessible to a more diverse and maybe particularly like younger audience. So that was probably my first reaction, was great, we get to kind of like get our teeth into something that feels a bit more to do with our lives or what we recognise around us. So pretty excited.
Yes, great. Yeah. And in terms of taking inspiration from the original text, did you visit that at all?
I did. That I looked at other kind of artists who had kind of focused on it as a story, and I looked at the kind of wider themes and probably did some research around that. What I was really drawn to was the core female character and her journey standing up to sort of a tyranny, sort of being a sort of feminine voice in a very male-dominated sort of patriarchal kind of constricted society. So that was kind of what I looked into initially, and the experience of the woman within the play, because it's quite, you know, the text is, you know, the dialogue's fantastic, but it's really like dominated by sort of the threat of violence and the kind of really oppressive sort of male characters. So to have her stand in defiance of that sort of struck me as like a really important key visual and storytelling theme that I wanted to kind of focus on at the beginning. So I found that exciting.
Yes, and once you looked at the themes, because there are some epic themes in the play, you know, the power and family and patriarchy and things. What's your next step on the journey?
Yeah, I guess ultimately, while Roy is sort of constructing the world of the play, the language, the dialogue between the characters, it falls to the director and the designer to kind of support and create a visual world that sort of supports the text. So, as you said, if you took it completely out of context and completely away from the original, it wouldn't have the necessary struggles in it that make the story stand on its feet. So elements that Roy focused on, the nightclub, the kind of the real dominant power, dictatorship of a gang or of a political system, we had to find that in a visual world that's around us now, so that we could make the same themes stand up. I think in everyone's mind, when they think of like Greek classical kind of theatre, there are images that just kind of, you know, are immediate. You know, we think of the amphitheatres, we think of Greek architecture, we think of like, you know, big political kind of like institutions of great seats of power. So it's really important that you kind of bed that in so that people, you know, so that you are going to pull those parallels, but also find a kind of twist in communicating it visually that allows it to kind of be in Roy's new world. with this particular one, I was really drawn to kind of Grecian, like colonnades. You know, if you think of like Greek Ionic columns that you'd sort of, you know, classical. I imagined Antigone sitting outside of the city walls. What that physically would have been, like what we needed to kind of tell that story again. So I've got all of those sort of beautiful architectural kind of, but obviously that's not our world. That's not what Roy's written. So also driving from city to city doing design work, you pass underpasses, you pass nightclubs on the outside of towns. I mean, we're in Stratford East now in East London. You know, you go around the back of nightclubs. It felt to me like being outside the city walls was kind of being on the being pushed out to the fringes of your society. So we shared a lot of images of that kind of world. The sort of under an underpass was a really big inspiration. The columns that hold these big concrete columns, which remind me of the Greek, but also speak of an urban kind of gritty, kind of sort of slightly more brutal society and world that might exist in those spaces. So that was the first physical design sort of parallel that I was trying to wrestle with in the process.
Yeah, and I think that really comes through with the design, because you have these columns that echo Greek architecture,
yeah,
but so modern and so urban, you know, and with the fence, the wire fence at the back, and you can really see the real life inspirations, I suppose, that you got for the design in the show. I was just thinking a little bit about the audience and what maybe sort of early on in the process, what kind of emotions did you want to evoke in the audience through the design?
I think I wanted to allow them to have a familiar. I wanted them to go, oh, I kind of know that place. That's because it was going on a tour as well. So I didn't want to be too, it's about this place in London, because it's not. It's the same story told over centuries in multiple places. So I wanted the sort of the brutalist nature of it to be somewhere that everyone can recognize. I think everyone's probably walked past or driven past or gone on a bus past a bit of land which is slightly sort of, it looks a bit, not lawless, but like it feels a bit dangerous, you know? So I was really interested in that, and also the security fences, the idea of being in or out, like on the guest list, not on the guest list, like being kind of like exiled or being allowed in. Like what do you have to do to be on that list? Like where do you go? Where do the rules stop, and how far will you push your morals until you're part of that gang or not part of that gang? So this idea of I guess we call them like thresholds, but this idea of like being behind or in front of a gate, in or out of an entrance, like that's a really powerful kind of visual message to put on stage. So talking with the director, we knew that at some point we needed to shut part of it off so that we could keep, so that Antigone is kept in a cellar for a period of time, imprisoned, you know. Having a door that can open and shut is about talking about free will, when you're allowed to pass or you're not. So once we got the sort of, let's say the physical language of the space you're describing, then we started to talk about like the metaphorical language of how those spaces could work. So you're sort of starting to play with two visual dialogues with your audience. You know, you're allowing to tell the story with the physical, but then you're allowing them to take a bigger metaphorical journey by interpreting the spaces and the relationships that you're constructing around your characters as well, which is so important with this story, because it's so much about her decision and her free will, and ultimately what she chooses to do when she's up against that position of power. So those elements became really important as well. And I'm doing this because I remember the gates closing, yes, and the you know, the soldiers who were kind of military but also like club security guards crossover. So we're playing with that idea of soldiers, but you know, being soldiers in a gang or being soldiers in a military dictatorship. You know, there's all those sort of subtle metaphorical kind of allusions that we're making, and I think sometimes it's important for an audience to give them avenues of imagination to take rather than to just, you don't want to just tell the story like this is there, this is there. What you want to do is you want to invite the audience to think and take a cognitive journey with the play as well.
And I love that you talked about the timelessness of some of the themes, because the design is very timeless as well, I think, in that it's sort of modern and urban in its feel, but I think you could see it in any sort of time period. Yeah, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
I think the timelessness is really important. The push of it is that if you're too specific, naturalism is really helpful in lending sort of information, but it's not necessarily your best path to sort of engagement. So I guess the timelessness of it, some of the women like wear slightly draped fabrics because there's a sort of an allusion to sort of Grecian kind of fabrics, which is really nice, but it also was like very fashionable, and there are like contemporary versions of that. So again, I'm trying to get a sort of crossover of the two worlds so that we're sort of dabbling on the outside of their specific time, which was, you know, a really interesting kind of costuming kind of path to go down. Because there is this nightclub in there, I thought everyone's of a certain age has got an experience of that nightclub. So it was really important to get the sense of it, but not be, they're all so different. I really didn't want to over-prescribe the location. So I think in the Grecian / kind of underpass motorway columns that we've got, you know, we used little kind of technical theatre tricks, like we embedded some lighting around there. So we could use the lighting a bit like the interior of a nightclub. So what we did is we kind of had almost an outdoor open space, but also when you use the like practical lighting is what we call it, if it's embedded in the set on stage. So when we used that and flashed it, it gave it the sense that it was kind of, you know, that those kind of like lighting systems that you have in kind of nightclubs. And the only other visual point that I sort of wanted to discuss was this idea that we actually use quite a lot of video projection from time to time, and that was for me was a really interesting language to introduce, because I put a number of video CCTV cameras on the design, and in the original design paperwork, actually there were loads, there were hundreds, because it felt to me like this idea of being watched, this CCTV back of a nightclub world, felt to me like the fates or the gods overseeing everything. So I was trying to sort of embed the video we used into this idea of this omniscient sort of like overview of the fates, which is a really interesting, another theme that is played with in the play as well.
So following on from that, your choice is to use quite a bit of technology, the mobile phones, the CCTV. Where was that rooted? Was it just to bring it up to date, or?
It's important that we have that dialogue and we don't just consider the images that we're presented with as a truth, not to be, you know, not to be kind of looked past. So including that CCTV stuff it was sort of asking the audience to consider, you know, who are the people you're looking at? Why are you looking at them through this lens? It's the lens that you've been told to consider them through, rather than the truth of the conflicts they're facing in their lives. And it's so powerful. And I think that it has been in the hands of the state or the authorities, but actually, in a sense, it's that video content, that recording of civilian life has become democratized. Like we can record, we can step outside this building and record what we see and share it. And I think, you know, when we first considered it, potentially 10 years ago, that lens was, I was drawing attention to it because I thought it was a protest mainly to do with CCTV and surveillance. But actually, the journey that it's taken is really interesting, because you look at it now and you kind of go, actually, to record those sort of social events and those miscarriages of justice is like really vital. So I think the recorded image has sort of more power and more sort of agency for people now as well. So I think if we were sort of going to go back and restage it now, we'd probably like lean more into that and make it more, you know, more in the hands of the characters in the play, rather than setting them as the eyes of the gods. Maybe actually that, you know, a lot of visual language is very contextual. It depends on the society we're living in now. So a choice that I made, you know, 10 years ago is an interesting one in that context, but you put it into the context now and it has even greater sort of significance. If you were to stage Roy's play in another 20 years, there'd be another set of visual codes and visual languages that you'd want to adopt. And it's the designer's job to kind of hold the whole of the world and like edit it in space, in visuals, edit it with the director and kind of construct it. Because ultimately you're going to stand in a workshop and have it built out of wood and paint. But it's what you present at the end has to come from a, you know, an artistic, personal response. And that's the sort of amazing journey of being a designer. It comes from the page and you put it physically on stage for an actor to hide behind a pillar or for an actor to be seen through something or partially seen. Those are all really important choices that help the audience see that character the way you imagine their emotional being is at the time. So you're collecting and learning about a world, but ultimately you want the audience to have a greater understanding or a bigger emotional response to it. So it's a really unique and amazing process, but it is complicated, and with every play, with every piece of dialogue, you have a different way to get into it. But that big collection at the beginning is vital always for me. I always have to know the kind of the periphery of the worlds I'm going into, as well as the kind of key themes at the center, because you know, you put them in the wrong trainers and they, you know, the actors will tell you. You work with the actors and you do fittings, and, you know, when we were doing fittings for the suit for Crit, like he knew what kind of like collar he wanted. Like he, you know, and you've got to go, well, I know that you need to have power. I know that costume needs to make you look like you've got money and power. But I know that you know that this is what makes you feel like, you know, you put a strong collar on an actor and you put them in some like you know, well-tailored shoes, like some good shoes, like their body changes and they walk with a different, they are, as actors, you're giving them the things they need to tell the character that they're being asked to kind of play. And it's amazing. And that's a kind of to and fro as well. I don't always know the right answers, but you've got to listen and watch and kind of adapt from the sides. You know, we'd be in the wings, I'd be going, that's not the right jacket, is it? And you need to give them something bigger, because in that scene they need to come in and they need to kind of own the space. And it's constantly about checking what the messages are you're communicating with the audience and how you can help the actors do that for themselves as well, you know? So it's complex, it's great.
And absolutely beautifully explained there. That was just, yeah, that was amazing.